Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to you tonight about reactivity and aggression. This is a hugely important topic that affects thousands, if not millions, of dog owners throughout the UK. It can be true for rescued dogs, but in reality, all dogs, whatever age, pretty much, can be affected by possibly reactivity issues or even a more extreme aggression-related problems. The first key point really is, what do we mean by reactivity? Now, reactivity is, in essence, an abnormal response because all dogs react. So a knock at the front door, every dog reacts to that. But really mean an overreaction or overreactivity, a response that's too intense, that's far more than any normal person would expect from their dog. Now, it doesn't have to be to dogs, it could be to sounds, it could be to other people, it could be to fireworks, lots of different examples of reactivity. But primarily tonight, we're going to look at the example of dogs and people. We'll look at the actual cause of reactivity. More importantly, we're going to look at possible solutions. Now, reactivity is related to something called arousal, but it's not the same thing. Arousal really means alertness. It's like energy level. Related to kind of a drive you get with certain dogs, like kind of German Shepherds or Cocker Spaniels. Often kind of working dogs have really high drive, really high arousal level. That's always a factor. But it's true also our doodles. As I'm sure you know, lots of doodles are very excitable, very alert. Now, reactivity can be linked to arousal because the more aroused a dog is, probably the more chances they are of being reactive. But it's not that simple, it's far more complicated than that. And secondly, arousal can be good or bad. So for example, you might start the day off with perhaps a nice game of fetch or whatever, or tug of war. That's going to increase the arousal level of your dog. On the other hand, perhaps they see a cat go past the wall, they hear a car, and the dog barks. That's going to increase the actual arousal level. So come back to that concept later. Another issue is, well, is reactivity and aggression the same thing? Now, clearly, they are related. Lots of the behavior you think of as being reactive, such as kind of barking on the lead, looks very aggressive, lunging and barking. But there are some differences. Aggression involves a lot more intensity. Aggressive dogs are more likely to actually bite. Now, clearly, it's not that simple. Again, it's a kind of spectrum. Reactivity on the one side, overreacting to a stimulus, and real aggression, more aggressive bite-like behavior with real intensity, real focus at the other end of the spectrum. But again, it's all related. I'm going to come back to all these concepts as we keep going. Now we look at arousal in a little bit more detail. It's possibly a good and a bad thing. A classic explanation of arousal normally refers to an emotional cup or sink or even blowing up a balloon. Let's say you start the day with like a completely empty cup. You're nice and relaxed, great night's sleep. If it's you or your dog, it's a similar kind of end result. This is all kind of basic psychology. Now, during the day, things happen. To us, it might be kind of being late for work, not having your car keys, can't find your phone, wherever it is. But that's kind of stress, or cup in this case, fills up with water as the day goes on. Then something happens and that cup might overflow. Maybe it's buckling down, you get soaked, you're on a date at night and you're late for it, and perhaps you overreact. If one small thing happens, it's the kind of straw that broke the camel's back and you overreact. It's quite similar for dogs in a more simplified way. They might perhaps go out for an exciting walk, a bit of energy, that's a bit of arousal, filling the cup a little bit. Now it's a good thing, but it's still filling the cup if it's very excited. And then they might hear a car horn goes off, fills the cup a bit more. Then perhaps they see other dogs, they get a little bit stressed, that builds up. Then they perhaps maybe it's nighttime, might hear some fireworks and even react even more. So if this cup fills up during the day We call it trigger stacking. Every little thing adds more stress to your daily life. Now, when one last thing happens, whether it's a firework or seeing another dog, or in your case, running late for something, we tend to overreact to it. So the more we can do to reduce these triggers, to have a calmer life, a less stressful life, both for us and for our dogs, the less likely we are to overreact. So arousal, again, is directly linked to reactivity and aggression. The calmer we are, the calmer our dogs' lives are in general, the more they can cope with day-to-day activities. There are two main causes of reactivity: frustration and fear. Now, first I want to take frustration because people often overlook this, and it's pretty common in Labradoodles and Cockapoos and most Doodle crosses. You often see a kind of dog barking on a lead, trying to get closer to another dog. Now, this is, again, not fear at all. It's not that they're scared of the other dog. It's almost like a level of excitement or arousal where we just can't cope, and we're pulling, even barking to get closer. Now, but again, this can be a serious issue, partly because frustration can eventually lead to reactivity and fear, but also because it's a stressful thing to go through. Puppies might have that most excited, energetic of intentions. We're trying to get closer and we're holding them back. But even if we did perhaps let them go and run over, they might be very friendly, but firstly, we don't know that, and secondly, the other dog, the other owner, might not appreciate it. So it's still a real issue. We have to look in a bit more depth about what frustration is and how you can see it in your dog, the kind of body language, the signals, how you know you have what I often call a frustrated greeter. Now, as I'm from an academic university background, I've got to admit I love a good definition. So what is frustration? Wow, in essence, it's a lack of fulfillment. The expectations aren't being met. Hopefully they are in this webinar. But for our dogs, you see that often in their daily lives. They might be kind of barking for a ball, wanting to kind of throw a stick. You might have them perhaps occasionally in a pen or a crate, and they see you in the garden, and they start to whine or bark. Classic examples of frustration. You might have a couple of treats in your hand, especially if like more than one dog. Feeding one dog, the other dog whines, it barks. You can see frustration often in our daily lives for dogs. So it's not just a human concept. Now with frustration, you can definitely, as I say, see it in reality. But there are different kind of causes, different kind of root factors behind it. And with some dogs, it can be almost like a general frustration. There's so many different individual things in their daily lives that build up that they can find it frustrating. But with reactivity, it tends to be more barrier frustration. So they're there on the lead, they've got a lack of freedom, got a lack of control. They want to get closer to this other dog. They're really excited about it. They want to get closer and closer, but naturally, of course, we're holding them back for their own safety. And we tend to whine and bark and lunge. And just look at their kind of body language for basic signs. You can tell it's not aggressive. Doodles and Cockapoos often kind of paw to get closer. It's obviously very energetic and whining. That kind of energy, that kind of arousal level turns them into a frustrated greeter. Lots of other dogs don't appreciate that dog kind of pawing towards them, barking at them even. And they often, if they're especially nervous or reactive, bark back. And that kind of lack of social awareness, that kind of lack of good behavioural skills can be a real issue. So though it's perhaps not quite as serious as reactivity and fear, we shouldn't overlook it. Now, how do you actually deal with this? How do you actually conquer frustration in our dogs? And in previous webinars on life skills, I've looked at teaching a leave it, teaching a wait, and teaching a stay. They are really important skills. They can really help to teach self-control or impulse control to our dogs. The ability to have that kind of control over what they do. Not necessarily kind of to lunge or to pull. Even loose lead walking is a good guide to this. Teaching attention on the owner. How to get your dog more focused on you rather than pulling to go away. You could even teach the dog to kind of go and say hi. But we have to look at you first when we see a different dog. Then in the next stage, you say, go say hi, and that's a reward. We call it a life reward of moving across. Now, I've covered weights, stays, loose lead walking, recall in the life skills webinar I did. So I don't want to kind of recap that. There's also short guides to those things on my YouTube channel, Harrison's Positive Dog Training. So I want to move on now to the more kind of serious topic of reactivity and fear. When people think about reactivity and aggression, it's often this area they think of, reactivity and fear. In truth, reactivity is almost always driven by fear or phobia. The causes can be quite varied, and bear in mind this can apply to both people and to dogs. So it might be a dog that's perhaps a lack of socialization, that's often the case. It can perhaps be because of bad experiences. Often we won't actually know the actual cause, particularly with a kind of rescue dog. But in truth, no dog is a clean slate. Even a puppy at 8 weeks of age will have hereditary trait behaviors. And if a parent were fearful, that can genetically carry over in the dog's DNA. And that's been scientifically proven. Also, fear and this kind of reactivity and aggression can be a learned behavior. A dog might start off as a kind of frustrated greeter. It might be overly excited, pulling towards another dog. Other dogs might react back, they might react aggressively. The dog might get told off time and time again by the other dog, and it might learn that the way to respond back to that is by lunging and barking to try to scare away the other dog. So what might be excitement and arousal can go from being a frustrated greeter over to being a more truly reactive or even aggressive behavior. And this can be a sad path of events, almost a cycle. What we have to do is try to interrupt that cycle and change that psychological connection, turn that fear into a much more positive emotional experience. Again, have to love a definition. So going back to our definition of reactivity, in this case, it's an overreaction. It's this kind of abnormal response to a trigger, to a stimulus. Someone walking in through the front door and they overreact by incessantly barking, by not calming down, by lunging. They see another dog in the park and they're pulling on the lead through leash reactivity, they're pulling to get closer, incessantly barking and lunging. Now, this kind of overreaction can be dealt with in two different ways. Firstly, by management, how to control the situation. When perhaps a visitor comes to the house, you might have a dog in a different room and they're brought out on the lead until they've calmed down. Now, management can help, but that's not a long-term solution. When we actually deal with this, we do it through training, or what's more accurately called behavior modification. You're changing how the dog feels about that stimulus, turning it from something fearful, a negative psychological response, into a much more positive association. Now we're going to look at solutions, how to actually resolve this problem of reactivity, particularly with regard to fear. There are different aspects of this, but I want to first explain the idea of perception and threshold. When a dog that's fearful and reactive sees something in the distance, we call that perception. Generally, you can work with a dog at that point. They might take treats, they might interact with you, they might give the owner attention. That's a really key thing. Awareness of a slightly scary object or person or dog is a good thing. But at some point when the dog's too close to it, whether it's a person or a vacuum cleaner or another dog, the dog will start to overreact. It will lose control. The emotional cup will overflow. That we call threshold. You can't work with a dog at that point. So all you can do at that point is management, bringing the dog away to a place where they can be calmer, further away from the actual stimulus, the scary thing. Now we try to work around the kind of perception point and keep at that area. And that's key for our next aspect, which is desensitization and counter conditioning. Well, firstly, what do these kind of funny words mean? What is desensitization? Well, it's having a scary stimulus in a watered down form. So for example, if say a dog overreacted to the doorbell going, you might record the sound of the doorbell on your phone and then play it back at a low volume. Gradually, eventually, the dog would kind of learn to desensitize. That noise would become kind of basic background noise. It would become meaningless. With regard to a person or another dog, you would have that person or dog in the distance. And again, you might perhaps walk your dog around nice and calmly with a person or another dog in the distance. In the long term, this can work. It can very gradually and very slowly change how your dog feels about having that scary thing in the same location. But it does take time. Because it takes time, we try to speed that up through counter conditioning. So we try to pair the scary thing at a low volume or a low intensity with something really positive which your dog enjoys. Now for most dogs, that's really high value treats. I don't mean the sort of thing you might buy from a normal pet shop. I mean really high value stuff like kind of real chicken, little bits of sausage, little bits of ham, little bits of beef, something that your dog really loves. And you couple the two together. So you almost always do desensitization and counter conditioning at the same time. You might have another dog a long way away, perhaps even a football pitch away in the field or park. When your dog sees it, if it remains calm, you calmly, gently feed your dog these high value treats or bits of chicken. So in the long run, the dog's going to connect seeing scary dogs in the distance will give something really, really good and high value coming from you. Now, we'll look at this in a little bit more detail. With regard to dogs and reactivity, the leading worldwide expert is the American behaviorist Greta Stewart. She developed a thing called BAT and BAT 2.0. Now this is behavior adjustment training. BAT 2.0 is her latest version of it. I think just saw Zara jumping off there. Now, Greta's idea really is, if you have a really enriched environment, perhaps like a field or a park, but it's very common to actually have dogs, but ideally dogs on lead, but it's not really essential, but dogs on lead would help. You can walk your own dog on a nice long lead. Walking it calmly and perhaps like a 6 or 10 foot lead, letting your dog explore that environment. A proper exploratory walk, what I call a stop and sniff walk. If your dog remains calm, they can just gently amble about the park however they wish to. You're essentially following your dog around the park. If they overreact on sight of another dog, you gently, helpfully guide your dog away. Now, in essence, this is pure desensitization. It's having an enriched environment. The environment is almost kind of a life reward, which helps to keep your dog calm. If they remain calm, they get to move around this field in a nice, relaxed way. If they start to overact, you gently guide them away. Greta's work is really, really good. A lot of information out there. She's written her own book. There's a great website on BAT 2.0, so I suggest you definitely look into it. There are other approaches though. Now, counter conditioning. In Greta's actual version of BAT 2.0, it's not essential to really do counter conditioning because the environment is so enriched, it's a life reward. Dogs don't need extras like treats or toys. But often we aren't lucky enough to have that kind of environment. And treats and toys can definitely help to create a different emotional response to the slightly scary stimulus, especially if it's a really high value item. Now, what I would definitely suggest is to head somewhere that's nice and quiet, where dogs normally kept on leads if possible. When you see another dog, if your dog's overreactive towards people, if your dog stays calm, reward that moment of calmness. Now, how you do this is going to vary a little bit. The standard traditional way of doing it is simply feeding treats, almost like kind of opening the fridge to the dog when they see the slightly scary thing, the person or the dog. So dog sees other dog remains relatively calm. It might look and focus a bit, but if it doesn't start lunging or barking, you start to feed. If your dog won't take treats, you move further away to a point where it can be calmer. Again, that does work, but there's a more advanced version. This is called the engage-disengage game. To do this, firstly, you have to teach your dog a marker. Now, marker is something used to mark, hence the word, the good behavior. A marker can be a clicker, or it can be a vocal marker, like yes or good. And the easy way to do this is to actually charge the actual marker. So you might just have to go click, treat, click, treat, click, treat for a few days, or simply yes, treat, yes, treat. Or you could wait for your dog to do the good behavior, maybe doing a sit or lying down and looking at you. Every time they do, you might click, then give a treat. Or say yes and give a treat. However you want to do it, it's entirely up to you. Whether you like vocal markers or clickers. Dog trainers always like clickers, but that's entirely up to them. Whatever you want to do is entirely your choice. When the dog learns the marker, that's the important thing. So then you're going to go to the park or to a field or on your walk with the other dog, hopefully at a distance away from you. And if you wanted to, you can even invest in something called a stooge dog. It's like kind of stuffed toy dog. Now, I've done a video just showing you how effective this can be, which I'll show you after this slide. But firstly, coming back to this engage-disengage game. The engage is looking at the other dog. Now, when your dog looks at the other dog or person, it can be used for both, then you would use your marker. You might simply say yes. Now, hopefully, your dog's going to look back at you expecting the treat because it knows marker is a bridge, a link to treats coming. So the dog looks at the other dog or person, which has been slightly scary, Lucy just come in, and then looks back towards you for the treat. So they engage in the scary thing by looking at it, and then disengage. They look away, so they're not obsessing. The attention is coming right back onto you, away from the scary thing. Eventually, by even saying yes, or using your clicker to mark, dogs, when they see other dogs or people, will start to look back round towards you, expecting the treat or toy to come directly from you, which is really a good way of training a dog. So I definitely recommend that, the engage-disengage game. It's great for tackling reactivity. Okay, Sarah, this way, Sarah. Good girl, good girl, good girl, good girl. Okay, pretty good. So it showed that Zara is reactive at least to a stuffed toy, not to a dog. So, Zara, this way. Good, really good. Really good. Zara, good. Zara, this way. Zara, good girl, good girl. Good girl. Zara, this way, this way. Good girl, good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Go, Sarah, this way. Good girl, good girl. Carry on. Zara, this way, this way. Zara, Zara, this way. Zara, what's this? Good girl, Zara, good girl. This way, good girl, good girl. Now that's one way of doing it. There's another alternative approach you could use called engage, disengage. Now that's when the dog looks at the other dog. When they do, as long as they're not overwhelmed by it, get a little bit too close, you could say your marker word, which could be yes or good, or use a clicker to mark the good behaviour of curiosity, and then hopefully disengage from it. So go a little bit further away to begin with. Sarah, this way. Good girl, good girl. Yes. Sarah, good. Do it again. Sarah, this way. Yes. Good. Sarah. This way. Yes. So doing the actual marking the good behaviour, looking at the other dog, in this case a black stuffed Labrador, and then rewarding after she looks back towards me. Good. So, this way. Good. So that's called engage, disengage. You mark the good behaviour for looking naturally with curiosity at the other dog, the engagement, and then you reward. So, this way. So, good girl. The disengagement, but looking back towards you. Okay, thank you. Well, my final thoughts, this might take a little bit longer than some of the other slides. Now, firstly, reactivity is a really serious thing. It's really not going to change in a webinar or overnight, in a week, or in a couple of weeks. That's because it's a deep-seated psychological thing. It's the emotional response. The dog might have a fear, and fears can be healthy. Fears what stop people walking down dark alleys late at night, so it can be healthy. If you're a wolf, fear of people, it's a very healthy thing. But dogs aren't wolves. And we live in our lives, in our streets, in our towns, in our countryside, and living with us. So fear is not healthy at all. Unfortunately, fear can become a phobia. You might have something small that you're scared of, whether it's, I don't know, it's spiders, snakes, heights, flights, whatever it is, and it can start to interfere with your life. So dogs are the same. They might have a slight, perhaps, fear of one particular dog. It can often be, say, black dogs, because dogs can't pick up the body language clues from black dogs very well at all. They can't have the kind of perception of the detail. They can't see the facial lips move. They can't see possibly the actual kind of grooves just above the eyes. They can't see possibly the hackles on the back. They can't judge the entire body language as a dog kind of relaxes and moves generally. They can't perhaps even tell that clearly what the tail's doing on a black dog. These things actually can make a real difference. So perhaps if your dog's a little bit fearful, it's often the kind of very friendly black Labrador sprinting over that they're reactive the most. And that's partly why I used a black Labrador as my stooge dog before, or at least a stuffed version of one. Because Zara, although she's great with other dogs, had never ever seen a toy dog before, so I wanted to try to kind of guess her response, and not surprisingly, she overreacted to it, especially as it's in our garden here. So definitely bear that in mind. Another point I would definitely say is that with reactivity, it's like a spectrum. You get very mild reactivity. We mentioned before the frustrated greeting behavior, more kind of excitement and arousal, kind of hyper alertness, expecting almost good things to happen, to more kind of serious fear reactivity. And then you have really serious aggression, very much more intense, very much more focused, where dogs might just look focused entirely on the other dog or person at a distance without any kind of thought about their owner. They're definitely pulling to get to that dog as fast as possible. And if they run over, they might perhaps even bite straight away or even barking. So in reality, there's no real difference, or at least no big divide between reactivity and aggression. It's all part of a spectrum of different behaviors. Finally, I want to kind of add a caveat. With this, which is kind of a very complex area, every dog's different. You have to be kind of dog detective. Judge your dog. Judge whether it's frustration. Is it really fear? Is it kind of heading into kind of real intense aggression? And what are the causes? With some dogs, it might be kind of resource guarding, the sofa or the bed. Other dogs, it might be kind of genuine fear, but more in the house when visitors come inside, partly kind of territorial aggression. Others might be dogs which are fine off the lead in the park, but on the lead on the walk home down the street, they overreact. Every dog's different and every situation is different. That's why I would recommend, if you have serious issues, to speak to someone directly for a kind of direct consultation, whether it's by Zoom or someone local to your area, to deal with your specific problem. In the next section, I'm going to help you with different bits of advice and tidbits, but I've got to kind of add that caveat that every dog's a different experience, and in this webinar, I can't really tackle every different behavioural issue that you might have satisfactorily. I will have a good go at giving general advice next. Okay, guys, questions. Now, if you have any questions, any burning issues I can help you with, please feel free to ask them now. Fire away, and let's get started. I'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of note down some things. I'll start to answer them.